Welcome to Coming from Left Field, where we have conversations about politics, books, and current events with your host, Greg Goddles and Pat Cummings. If my recall is accurate, before I graduated from high school, I was required to take just one standardized test, the SAT. Fast forward to 2002 when George Bush signed the No Child Left Behind Act, and we began an experiment based on the belief that we could test our way to educational success and end the achievement gap. Later, Barack Obama ratcheted up the stakes of test scores under the same philosophy with the Every Student Succeeds Act. And now the average student in America's big city public schools takes some 112 mandatory standardized tests between pre-kindergarten and the end of 12th grade. And is there any research that all this testing has improved our educational system and closed the achievement gap? Nope, nada. Let's discuss. Well, warm greetings, everybody. We are doing another podcast with Jesse Hagopian. Am I pronouncing that right?
Hagopian, yep.
Okay, and Jesse is a educator. Let me just go through: a union organizer, an author, a musician, contributor to a variety of a writer, has his own blog, and makes a good trouble. Do I have it about right?
Hey, that describes it.
Good, good. And Jesse, Greg and I have been doing this podcast for 3 years, and you're, I think, number 80. So we do it every couple of weeks. And we've had a lot of podcasts related to education. And I just realized you're our first teacher, that's kind of bad, when you think of it. We've had a lot of college, a lot of professors and people written books about educations and reporters and people have done podcasts, but welcome as the first high school teacher.
I'm happy to serve in that role. Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, Jesse. How'd you get into teaching, and how did you find yourself at Garfield High School in Seattle?
Well, I grew up in Seattle, and Garfield High School is my alma mater. So when I graduated from college, I went to teach in Washington, D.C. So I started teaching elementary school in Southeast D.C. in one of the most impoverished and segregated neighborhoods in the country. And I would drive by the White House, and 10 minutes later, I would be in this place that has been completely forsaken by anyone with power or wealth. And the school that I taught in was just crumbling around the kids. The first research project I ever gave the kids was a project to research someone from history that they admired that had helped create positive change for the world. And they came and brought those posters in on a Friday. And then we were going to present them on the Monday. So we get to school on Monday, and the posters are completely destroyed because it had just rained in our classroom, a half-inch of standing water on the floor. I found that there was a hole in the ceiling that just allowed the rain in, and I had a work order in for 3 years on that hole. I had to just park an industrial-sized garbage can in the corner of the room and let it collect rain. And, that was the same year that I began teaching, was also the same year of 9/11 attacks. And so we actually saw the smoke rising from the Pentagon from our school window, and it was terrifying. But what was even more terrifying to me was the fact that our government could mobilize untold billions of dollars to go bomb people halfway across the world, but couldn't fix the hole in the ceiling of my classroom in the shadow of the White House. And that experience of seeing the neglect of Black children in a completely segregated school, in the halls of government right there, is what made me want to dedicate my life to transforming the education system and a broader society that would abuse children in that way.
And then you ended up back at your alma mater, Garfield High School. And before you got on, I was talking to you. I did a screensaver. That's a green screen, and this is Garfield High School's classroom. That's where
I love it.
that looks like you should be home. So
Yes, no, I've sat in those desks as a student, and I've taught at that whiteboard. That I love it.
tell us about Garfield High School. I know because I'm from Tacoma and everyone knows about Garfield, but tell us the rich history of Garfield High School.
It's an incredible school. I guess I'm biased since I bleed purple and white, and I am a huge bulldog from being a student and a teacher, and my siblings going to that school. But the history of that school is incredible. The school has helped nurture some of the most incredible creative minds and uh, people in the struggle for social justice in our nation's history. I mean, uh, Quincy Jones is a graduate of Garfield High School who produced everyone from Frank Sinatra to Michael Jackson, right? That produced the highest selling album of all time. Jimi Hendrix is an alum of Garfield High School who transformed music uh, for everybody. And the founder of the first chapter of the Black Panther Party outside of California, Aaron Dixon, is a graduate of Garfield High School. And we have a long tradition of creativity and social action at Garfield High School that is an important part of the school. And I should say that right now, the Garfield High School community is grieving after a student was shot in front of the school just a couple weeks ago. And I know that students and educators are really working there now to help nurture and support their youth and build a safe environment for them. And I trust that they'll be part of struggles in the future to create a more safe and just school system. I'm not there right now as I'm suffering from long COVID and I'm not in the classroom, but my heart is with the Garfield community right
And
now.
and did you know this boy? I guess he was a real superstar, just a great kid,
Yeah,
athlete, bright kid, academic.
one wonderful kid. Everybody attested to that, and he was just trying to break up a fight and then got shot and killed. And it's tragic and it's enraging that uh, so much youth are being their lives are being cut short by gun violence in schools across the country. And we need more mental health counselors. Uh, we need more wraparound services. And we need to nurture and support our youth so they don't feel alienated and hopeless and engage in those kind of hopeless acts of violence that we're seeing in schools around the country.
Um, well, my heart goes out to you and everybody. I know it's just beyond words, and I just hope there's some resolution to all of this. So,
But
um,
I will say that uh, Garfield High School has been at the forefront of so many struggles, including walkouts for gun safety and for uh, banning assault rifles and um, getting more mental health counselors in schools. And my first year teaching at Garfield High School really showed me the power of the students that go to that school. I was laid off during the Great Recession. And, we have billions, well, actually turned out trillions of dollars to bail out the banks, but not enough for our schools. And so hundreds of teachers in Seattle and thousands more teachers across the country were laid off after the Great Recession. The silver lining for me is that's when I was rehired at Garfield High School
Mm-hmm.
a year later. And
Mm-hmm.
I taught an American history class there. And I used a lot of the Zen Education Project and Rethinking Schools curriculum uh, to teach that AP US history course. And we looked at every social movement throughout history. I scrapped the test prep they wanted us to do and just went full in on teaching the history of social movements. We we reenacted the Seneca Falls convention that was the first major convention for the women's right to vote. And we reenacted abolitionist meetings where students would come to the meeting with many of the different strategies of the different organizations fighting to abolish slavery, and they had to debate which strategies were going to be most effective and then compare those to what the actual abolitionist movement decided to do. We reenacted meetings of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and the debates that they had about how to win in the civil rights struggle. And after all that year, um, I really, many of them did well on the AP exam, but to me, that wasn't when I knew they passed the test. It was the following year when the state legislature said that they were going to cut billions of dollars from the education budget. And a group of us teachers in the Social Justice Union Caucus called the Social Equity Educators, we went down to Olympia, the state capitol, and staged a citizen's arrest of the state legislature for breaking the Constitution that declares it the paramount duty to fund education. And in the course of that citizen's arrest, I was arrested and spent the evening in jail. But the next day, my students had created a Facebook page called Free Mr. Hagopian. And then when I got out, they changed the name to Walk Out Against the Budget Cuts. And the same students who had spent the whole previous year studying the history of social movements and not just hearing me lecture about them, but actually engaging in the debates of the time, those were the students that organized one of the biggest walkouts at Garfield. Hundreds of students marched to City Hall demanding to fully fund education. And I'm proud to say those students helped to pressure the Supreme Court of the state, and it wasn't long after that the Supreme Court ruled in the students' favor and demanded that the legislature add billions of dollars to the education budget. So Garfield has a storied history of struggle, both from, all throughout history, and it continues to this day.
What do you think, Greg? You know all those
Well,
people, SNCC, the Black Panthers. That's your that was your buddies when you were in college, right?
I wish my children would have had him as a teacher. I wish Jess would have been a teacher for my two girls when they were coming through the educational system. Teachers are so important. I mean, I grew up. I ran across a book when I was in grade school, worked at a public library, and it was the first sociology book I ever saw. And it was a box that said, your chances of going to college based upon your parents' occupation. And I went down the list at the very bottom was coal miner. And that's what my family were, all coal miners. So you start off, and I'm sure that's true, so many people, with low expectations. And the difference is made by teachers. My second grade teacher, Mrs. Mahoney, my high school teacher, Mr. Hartley, who made me think about a lot of different things that shaped who I was. I mean, it's just exciting to be around people who take that task on, because I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a school teacher. I want to do other things. But it's just so, I admire so much. And I got to say, I regret the teachers I have met that are just abject failures. I mean, just don't really care enough to do that. My high school American history teacher was just the opposite of Jess. I mean, the total opposite. She was an old, nasty person. I hate to say this, she used to tell us kids, I grew up in Illinois, about her boyfriend driving her to Indiana for lynchings. And it was sick. But, and of course, we got a picture of American history, which was incredibly distorted, just the opposite of what Howard Zinn would get you or Jess would give you. And so I'm just so grateful there are teachers like that. That's really all I have to say. I'm just happy that there are teachers like that.
Yeah,
Like you, Jess.
I have to tell you one Howard Zinn story. You talk about the people's history of the United States, which was this phenomenal retelling of history from the perspective of people's movements, and it's probably one of the most banned books around. I mean, it's subversive as all get out. But the first time I read it, I couldn't put it down. One of the proudest. I remember talking to a high school advanced placement teacher at Peninsula High School, and he said one of the most proudest moments in my life is when I had one of my old students as a senior. I saw him walking down the hallway, and he had a copy of the People's History that he had picked up, was reading.
Oh yeah, so, I love it.
I gotta tell you, I gotta. You're a good author.
Thank you.
Let's talk about this book here. More Than a Test Score, a new uprising against high stakes testing. And this is a book that you did a couple of years ago. And it is a collection of essays on the problem with the corporate Pearson testing model. And you've got to tell the story of what happened in Garfield High School when your reading teacher came to you. You were a union representative at that time. Is that correct, Jesse?
Yeah, that's right.
All right, you tell the story. Tell us what happened.
Absolutely. This is one of the greatest things that's happened to me in my life. And I love talking about this story because Mallory Clark contacted me one day in 2013. And she is an esteemed reading teacher at Garfield at the time. She worked with kids who were far below grade level in reading. And she was just renowned for getting them to grade level by the end of the school year. And she said she needed to talk to me. I assumed it was some kind of standard union issue. I came into her classroom at the end of the school day and she sat me down. She looked me in the eyes and she said, "Jesse, I'm not going to give the MAP test this year, the Measures of Academic Progress test, this computerized, standardized, high stakes test." And I just lit up. I mean, I had helped to organize votes to oppose the use of this test in our union that narrowly passed before, and I'd been organizing fights against standardized testing, but here was someone who was ready to take direct action against the test. And so we went department by department at Garfield High School and we interviewed all the teachers and we asked them, "Do you find any use in the MAP test?" And uniformly, everyone said it was a complete waste of time. Mallory Clark's problem with the test was that it gave her no useful information about reading. She said, "Guess what I want to do if I want to know what grade level my students read at? I use the revolutionary technology of the book." And the kids actually read out loud to me. And then I know not just a score that a computer spits out, but I know the specific challenges they have with reading. And I can see it and hear it. And what this test is doing is giving them a score that demoralizes them, tells them they're no good, and then I have to try to undo that for the rest of the year. And I'm not going to do that anymore, she said. And it was similar in the math department. They said that the test wasn't even aligned to the subjects they were teaching. So it was testing algebra students on geometry, which they likened to if a Spanish teacher was getting French questions on their test. Yes, it's foreign language, but it's a different subject. So there was so many flaws with this test that we called an all-school meeting and we asked people what they wanted to do. And everybody spoke out about how they hated the test. But of course, their question for me as the union rep was, what would happen if we join Mallory and we don't give the test? And I had to be honest with them and say, we could be labeled insubordinate, and we do have a progressive discipline policy, but ultimately you could be suspended or fired. And those were not the words that inspired Garfield's map test boycott. In fact, there was another teacher, Karen Gunn, the math teacher, and she stood up and asked if she could speak. And she said, I would rather be fired for standing up for what I believe in than seeing this test be used to label and shame my kids anymore. And at that moment, I said, let's take a vote. And we got a unanimous vote to refuse to give the test. And at that point, we organized a press conference. We invited the media to Garfield into Adam Gish's second floor classroom, right next to the one that's behind you, actually. And the media came in, and you better believe my heart was racing then, because I was really worried, like, wow, we're actually going to do this now. What are the consequences going to be? If someone gets fired, that would be a disaster. And it could really set the movement back also against standardized testing. So we did it. And it wasn't long after that. And sure enough, the school district issued a threat of a 10-day suspension without pay for any teacher who refused to administer the map test. And that's when we really had to kick the organizing into high gear. And we had people from all over the country and all over the world flooding the school district with the message, suspend the test, not the teachers. We had rallies with the NAACP. The PTA of Garfield High School voted unanimously to support us. The student body government voted unanimously to support us. It became a social movement. The boycott spread to 7 other schools. And schools all across the country were taking pictures of themselves with signs that said, scrap the map, and sending them to our school district. It was truly an invigorating, inspiring movement. And not even the first year teachers who didn't have any tenure protection backed down. Not a single teacher administered the test. I'll just add that the school district tried to get around our boycott by mandating that the administrators come in and take the kids out of our classes and march them to the computer lab to take the test. And at that point, students staged a sit-in in their own classrooms, refusing to get up and go, saying, we want to actually learn. We want to learn this lesson that our teacher has prepared for us and not be taken away for another high-stakes standardized test to be told by some corporation what's important to learn rather than our own teacher. And then those few students that did go with the administrators, they just clicked through the test so quickly that the scores were invalidated. It was an incredible movement, and it was so powerful that by the end of the school year, not a single teacher was reprimanded, and the school district actually got rid of the map test altogether for Seattle's high schools. They no longer give the test.
Well, the lesson is you don't screw with Garfield High School Bulldogs, I think.
There you go.
That's the lesson. You know, I was the director of research and evaluation in Tacoma when that was going on. And I was a group of middle management, educational bureaucrats. Just think of Eichmann telling the people to get on the train and, you know, just do what you're told kind of guy. And I remember everybody was shocked with what was going on with you crazy people at Garfield. But you did some videos, you did some YouTube videos where the teachers were actually expressing their concerns in just this articulate, clear, focused way. And I took those videos and sent them out to my whole administrative team. And I said, these people are not nuts. You know, they're actually accurate in what their concerns were. And it's amazing because I remember going from what's going on there to being in complete solidarity with you over a period of just a month or so.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
and the more and more that happened, that what happened is more and more people started pushing back on how these standardized tests were not in sync with what was going on in the class. There was a famous professor at Washington State University that took the Wassel fourth grade test, and he took the Pythagorean theorem and said, "You don't teach Pythagorean theorem in fourth grade. You teach it in eighth grade. Why are you having this item?" And he went through and did an analysis like your math teachers were doing. I'm all for being accountable for math, but make it math that I'm teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And you really did with that movement. You started it lit a fuse, didn't it, across the whole country? Am I right? Is that exaggerating?
It was part of what detonated the opt-out movement. When teachers were willing to risk their jobs to get rid of high-stakes standardized tests, it exposed the whole, what I call testocracy, this industry, multi-billion-dollar industry that is profiting off of reducing the educational process of teaching and learning to a single score. And it was part of what we called the education spring that really ignited after we had started the boycott that winter. And that's when the mass opt-outs all across the country began. Parents by the hundreds of thousands in New York State began opting their kids out. And there were walkouts against these tests by students in Portland, in New Mexico, all across the country. And teachers began refusing to give the tests in Chicago and other places. So the movement that started at Garfield did help to spread across the country. And I think you're right, because we had researched what standardized testing was and how it was being used, it was hard for people to deny our truth, right? We had read Wayne Al's book Unequal by Design and learned that standardized tests were first imposed on the public schools in the United States at the behest of eugenicists who wanted to use these scores to deny access to learning for kids of color. And the SAT test was created by an open, proud eugenicist, and many of the other standardized tests. And so we knew this history, and we saw the way the tests were being used today to further segregate and punish kids of color and low-income kids. And when we were able to demonstrate that to the parents in our community, they understood why this was a social justice issue.
Right. Hey, Greg, we're hoping to have Vincent Bevins on with his new book, It Will Burn.
If we
And
burn it.
yeah, and as I'm listening to Jesse, he's exactly talking about one of the themes of the book, that so many movements start, but they don't have strong leadership. They don't have cohesive unions that force specific issues, and you have some of the best intentions fizzle away. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? The importance of the union and in this particular situation.
Well, I think what the story demonstrates his thesis. I mean, a story of one person taking up a leadership role, and because Jesse's the union representative, brings it to the people that are involved and engaged with it. They discuss it and they push it further. It's exactly what Bevins is talking about. It isn't a matter of everybody getting together and holding hands and letting everybody talk. It's a matter of getting organized and having a vehicle for organization. And in this case, the union was the vehicle for organization. Without the union, Jesse may or may not have been heard. I mean, may or may not have been the person that the reading instructor went to. But because there's a union there, there's a structure there, and then they build upon that, you can go forward. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misunderstanding of this. There's a lot of popularity today to, I'll call it a quasi-anarchist approach to movements. And that is everybody gets together, everybody talks, everybody's an expert. There is no leadership. But in all those cases, leadership emerges, but it's not selected or not democratic. It just emerges. The person that can talk the loudest and the most often wins. And it goes nowhere. So we've seen movement after movement after movement get a really good start and then go nowhere. In the case of the school and Jesse, we see how it does work and how it should work when you have leadership, and when you have a structure, an organization that you can build around.
That brings me to two things. This book here, Black Lives Matter at School, and it is again a book that you helped work, an uprising for educational justice. And I will move out of the way here. Behind me, I superimposed a Muir Elementary School, Black Lives Matter. You have got to tell the story about Muir Elementary.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And people can read about it more in depth in that book that I co-edited with Denisha Jones, and it has many chapters from leaders in the Black Lives Matter at School movement from across the country. But it started in Seattle in 2016 when a group of really dedicated educators at John Muir Elementary School wanted to begin the school year in September celebrating their Black youth, because this was the fall that was coming right after a really difficult summer of racial violence when Philando Castile and Alton Sterling were killed by police on social media for all people to see. And it was deeply traumatizing for Black families and Black youth. And they wanted the Black families and youth to know that John Muir was a place that was going to nurture them and support them. And so they organized a celebration of Black culture and identity. And the art teacher designed that flag that you have on the whiteboard behind you that said Black Lives Matter, we stand together, John Muir Elementary, and designed that for a t-shirt that all the teachers were going to wear. And then a man named Deshaun Jackson organized with Black Men United to change the narrative. And they were going to partner with the parents at John Muir to have this big celebration in front of the school to high-five all the kids on the way in, and then hold Black History celebration in the auditorium. The problem was a white supremacist made a bomb threat against an elementary school just because they wanted to celebrate their Black youth. And so the school district officially canceled the event. And to the great credit of the community, they did go ahead with it anyway, but it was smaller than it would have been without the school districts canceling. And that morning they had to go in the school with bomb sniffing dogs to see if that bomb had actually been planted. It was just heartbreaking to me. So a group of us, again, in the social equity educators, social justice caucus in the union, went to those teachers and we said, how can we support you? And a teacher named Sarah Arvey helped to put forward the resolution in our union to say that we stand in solidarity with John Muir Elementary. And if we're really in solidarity, all of us will go to school wearing those shirts that say Black Lives Matter. So we picked October 19th to be Black Lives Matter at School Day, and we urged all teachers to wear that shirt. But we got real nervous after we passed that resolution, because if teachers didn't wear that shirt to school that day, that would send a very strong message to our Black youth that actually their lives didn't matter in our schools. So we had to organize again. We had a press conference organized with the NAACP, the Black student unions. The PTA of Seattle voted to support us. They were part of the effort. And we had to organize a t-shirt distribution operation that the logistics were just off the charts, but we delivered over 2,000 t-shirts to teachers all over Seattle, and many other schools made their own t-shirts for their schools. So by the time October 19th came, we had some 3,000 out of the 5,000 educators in Seattle go to school wearing those shirts, and many of them teaching lessons about the Black freedom struggle. And then an incredible thing happened, which is that Philly saw us in the news, and the educators in Philadelphia took it to a whole nother level. They expanded it from a day of action to a week of action and broke down the 13 principles of the Black Lives Matter Global Network for teaching points for each day of the week. And that became the model for a national movement. And the following year, we had teachers from all over the country get on an organizing call, and we organized the first week of action that has happened ever since. And we've even expanded it now to the year of purpose. So we now have a framework for bringing anti-racism into the classroom. And this is part of what scares those who are up in arms about critical race theory. You know, my newest book is called Teach Truth, The Struggle for Anti-Racist Education. It comes out in January. And I've been interviewing the teachers in this struggle, fighting to keep anti-racist education in the classroom, some of which are part of this Black Lives Matter at School movement, but many are just teaching about U.S. history that's now illegal to talk about in many states.
When you look at what you're teaching, you're just trying to bring accurate information about what occurred in our country, so we can learn for it. Jim Crow was a bad time. The Black Panthers movement, most of them were killed, murdered. I mean, there's some history of these struggles that is very, very important, I think, for high school kids to be aware of. And this whole Prager University, Christopher Rufo conservative assault on our public schools is problematic. I don't know. Do you feel it?
It's a battleground. I mean, I see the whole thing as a battleground. I mean, the educational system, history is a battle. It's a war. And only one side is really fighting as hard as it can, and that's the right, unfortunately. I mean, they're fighting hard. I don't begrudge them. They understand it's a war. It's a war for minds. Sadly, liberals have not taken that up. Liberals have not conducted that fight. Obviously, around Black history, people have, and that's become the major focus. But it's really a battle for our history, all of our history, and we're losing it because they're fighting and we're not.
Yeah,
I hear you. I will say that because we made such incredible strides in the wake of the 2020 uprising, that's what scared racists so thoroughly, that they realized, you know what, we can't win the debate about U.S. history. This country was founded on enslavement of Black people and genocide of Native people, and the legacies of slavery and genocide continue to this day in disproportionate wealth, in mass incarceration, in disproportionate educational funding, and on and on. And those were laid bare by the 2020 uprising. The largest number of people in U.S. history took to the streets, and many of those people were young people who demanded that they learn about how it is that Black people could continue to just be killed by police with impunity. And that was changing the schools. And because of this uprising and all of the changes in education that were beginning to occur, the right wing knew that they were losing this debate. So instead of debate, they just want to shut down debate, and they want to make it illegal to teach about the truth of U.S. history. So today, almost half of all children in the United States now go to a school where it is mandated that the teacher lie to students about structural racism and U.S. history, that they're not allowed to teach that structural racism has been an integral part of the United States. And you're right that unfortunately liberals have not uh, met the moment and have not stood up against that right-wing attack, often because some of those elite politicians who are Democrats receive funding from the same billionaires who they know where they get their funding from, and those billionaires are not keen to start to see students interrogate wealth distribution and systemic racism. And so, unfortunately, they're not standing up. But thankfully, there is an incredible movement, the Teach Truth movement, of educators all across the country who are fighting back. And on June 8th, we had our National Day of Action. Over 170 different communities across the country rose up on that day to hold rallies, teach-ins, banned book swaps, flash mobs, and historical walking tours. I mean, this was our 4th annual Teach Truth Day of Action, and the walking tours have been this incredible people's history event across the country. In Michigan, a community went to the train tracks where Malcolm X's dad was lynched and held a remembrance there, and then marched to the hospital where he ended up dying and gave out banned books to the kids at the hospital. You know, there's just been some really creative ways of demonstrating the importance of keeping honest history alive and organizing people into the struggle for it. I'm proud to be part of that movement as an organizer with the Zen Education Project.
Jesse, in our liberal town, Seattle, in 2020, there was a huge protest for Black Lives Matter in Seattle. And this is Seattle Times reporting from just a couple of weeks ago. Almost all of it was peaceful. There were a few of the Portland anarchists all dressed in black that come up and do their, things, but that was a cursory, just a handful of people. The police response to that was remarkable. Tear gas, rubber bullets, people. One vet was beaten because he had a cane and he couldn't run fast enough, and he was beaten and arrested. Broken bones. 50 people sued the city and just won a $10 million lawsuit. The police department hired an academic, Dr. Clifford Scott, an expert hired by the city to analyze, that is specialized in analyzing protesters and trying to convince everybody that the police were in fact right to handle this in this situation. His conclusion was that he had never seen a level of aggressive, violent police response against protesters in any democratic state. That was the police department's expert. So, this stuff happens. This is a struggle. This is a war. This is not pretty. And this is in our liberal Seattle that they had a completely inappropriate response to peaceful protest.
That's right. I mean, it is outrageous. The Seattle Police Department is just completely out of control. I mean, recently a Seattle police officer was going 75 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone and ran over Indian American woman, killed her, and then the head of the police officers guild was on the phone with the vice president, and they were joking and laughing about her dying, saying that her life was of, quote, limited value. And I mean, just one abuse after the other. I myself was assaulted by the Seattle Police Department in 2015 when I was on the phone with my mom coordinating a ride from the Martin Luther King Day rally to my son's 2-year-old birthday party, and I was pepper sprayed in the face without provocation by a Seattle police officer. Uh, their use of force has been so extreme that they've been under federal receivership since 2012. Uh, and they had the most number of police of any police force in the nation go and attend the January 6th riots at the Capitol and participate in those abuses. Um, they're being sued. The chief of police of Seattle, who just stepped down, is being sued by a string of women accusing the entire police department and him of sexual harassment and grooming. I mean, we could go on and on. They killed a mother of Seattle Public School student Charlena Lyles in her own apartment building when she called for help. They came in and shot her in front of 3 of her own kids. I mean, the atrocities are so plentiful, and they are perfectly willing to use police to brutalize and maintain the dramatic wealth disparity that exists in this country. But I'll just say this, they would prefer not to have to use the police. They would prefer that we police ourselves because we internalize the logic of capitalism, and we internalize the logic of white supremacy, and we learn in school to accept our place in low-wage jobs, to accept our place in prisons, and to accept that there will be a handful of billionaires who get all the wealth and privilege. And that's their preferred method of control, is using the schools to train kids to accept the inequality that exists. And that's why the teachers who are organizing for a different kind of education system that helps teach critical thinking and help students understand the power of social movements is such a vital part of rebuilding social struggle in this country.
I want to jump in and say one thing about the police. I have a lot of family members that are police. I have a nephew that's a second-year police officer, and my sister was a police chief in Seattle area. And I think they are aware that there are people within their ranks that are problematic. And there's a whole set of systems that are put into place that makes it very difficult to deal with that. And to add to that, they're remarkably underfunded. So you end up having, you have systemically dysfunction within the police ranks. And you're right, some of the atrocities are just, this Seattle Times story is, you read it and it's just, oh my God, I can't believe this.
I mean, I just think that we need to have more imagination than just thinking that police is the only way to keep communities safe.
Yeah.
Because when we look at the country, the safest communities, you can go to any city in the country. The safest communities are not the ones with the most police. They're the ones with the most resources.
Mm-hmm.
Go to any community across the country or around the world. So if we want safe communities, the lesson is clear. We flood our communities with resources.
Correct.
But I actually think that too much is spent on police, because when we have over half of Seattle's budget going to police rather than to, and we're getting ready to close 20 schools in Seattle.
Right.
20 elementary schools are about to be shut down in the shadow of Amazon and Microsoft and Boeing and Starbucks. It's just a shame to see the priorities of the system.
The tragedy
You're right.
is that all the national statistics show that violent crime is on the down. I mean, it's coming down, yet the media is complicit in getting these big budgets. And Pat, you're wrong. I mean, the police budgets are growing like wildfire because of that, because they're ginning up all this violent stuff, which is just counterfactual. I mean, there's enough violence. Indeed, there is violence. We all know that. But the trend is not the way it's portrayed. It's just the opposite of that. And so there's no cause for the kind of violence the police engage in. But again, you have to look at the administrators. You have to look at the administrators in the schools and administrators in municipal government. They don't have the guts to stand up to police unions, to police organizations, police supporters. They're the people that have to police it. They're the people that have to police the police, and they're not doing it. They're not doing it. So I mean, that's the reality. Whether it's Pittsburgh or Seattle, anywhere, the police do what they want to do.
You know,
What they want to do is always in the service of the wealthy, of the rich and wealthy, and that keeps them on the good side of administrators.
I agree with you, Jesse. You were right. You know, if you had more resources flowing in the community, you're not going to have kids sitting around gang banging down at Alki Beach. And Greg, you know, you're partially right. I think after the defund the police, Seattle ended up wiping out a huge number of police, and then realized that the crime was going crazy, and they tried to bring them back. It's the idea of hiring good people, hiring, you know, my nephew knows as much about Noam Chomsky as I do. He's a college educated, smart kid. He works hard, but I think there is within the organization dysfunction, and that's a separate issue than trying to train good policemen. All right, enough of this. You guys are going to get me in trouble with my family if we keep chatting too much about this stuff. So, all right. Hey, this is so cool, Jesse. I read this yesterday. It's in the Nation magazine. It is an article about you going to Mississippi with your father and your brother. And this is part of Juneteenth, Juneteenth, the last official slavery, supposedly, in Texas, and you did a pilgrimage to this beautiful plantation where your great grandparents were born. Tell us about this story. Give us an overview.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited that in 2 days I'm taking my own kids down to Mississippi, to that very place. But recently, my dad discovered where our family had been enslaved in Mississippi, in Morgantown, Mississippi, and in Lawrence County, Mississippi. And so we did a pilgrimage down to that area with my dad and my brother and my dad's friend John. And we were able to actually gain access to the very land that my great-great-grandmother Laura and my great-great-grandfather Thomas had been enslaved on. And the man who owned that land led us on the land, and he showed us where one headstone remained from an area where the enslaved people on that plantation had buried each other. And so we were able to hold a ceremony to honor our ancestors there. And we are returning this weekend to bring headstones to that to the gravesite where my great-great-grandparents are resting, and to dedicate those headstones to them in a ceremony. And I just can't tell you how important that is, to be able to connect with our history that has too often been taken from us, and to pass it on to my kids. And my brother is a filmmaker, and he's been documenting all of the research that my dad's been doing, and our multiple trips down to Mississippi and Louisiana, where the other side of my dad's family was enslaved. And we are working on getting that documentary out to show people the importance of keeping this history alive. You know, I mean, people think that slavery was such an incredibly long time ago. It was my great-great-grandmother who was enslaved there. And the last trip we took down to Mississippi, we found a 97-year-old woman who was actually, as a young person, friends with my great-great-grandmother, Laura
Oh my
Lenoir,
God.
who was enslaved. And she's still alive, and we were able to interview her for the documentary. And she called her Auntie Laura. So there are people still alive who are friends with enslaved people, right? It's not that long ago. And this is the history they're trying to erase. In Florida, the official state curriculum says that slavery was of, quote, personal benefit to Black people. I mean, this is the kind of outrageous revisionist history that sounds like it would come out of the Ku Klux Klan youth handbook, but it's actually official state curriculum. And I refuse to lie to my family, to my kids, to the students I teach, to the educators that I mentor about US history. I'm going to tell the truth about my family history, that my family was enslaved in Mississippi and Louisiana, and they deserve that to be recognized for all the work and labor and struggle and sacrifice that they did.
And we're trying to get Margaret Burnham on our podcast, who wrote the book How the Word is Passed, which is a history of Jim Crow in the South. It's not just slavery, but after slavery, the conditions, I think, could be almost equal to, if not worse, with all of the convict leasing and the manner in which people were treated. And her book recounts the Jim Crow era of just there literally was no court access to Black people in the South. Just it wasn't there.
Yeah.
It
I
had no
mean,
justice for years.
that's history I wish was taught as well. But I also wish that the Reconstruction era was taught better. And that's something that we're really pushing in the Zen Education Project,
Mhm.
because in the immediate years after the Civil War, before Jim Crow had taken root, there was incredible experiments in multiracial democracy that show the potential for institutional anti-racism, and what that could look like, and the power, liberating power that could be, when there were hundreds of Black elected officials across the South, even making it into the Congress, and when there were incredible multiracial movements of union leagues of Black and white workers joining forces to fight against lynching and for better wages. Um, it was this incredible flowering of democracy that was then cut short. And it's understanding that era that really teaches us what's possible in the struggle for racial justice, and how they cut that short, and why they imposed Jim Crow segregation in order to reestablish control over the population.
Any final thoughts, Greg?
Yeah, it's 1877 when Reconstruction formally ended. I mean, it was totally ended by then. The Jim Crow era actually reestablished slavery. I wrote a piece which I based it upon a young writer in the Wall Street Journal who consequently wrote a book about it. But the coal mines in Alabama, in the 20s and 30s, they would just grab Black people off the streets, charge them with some kind of a crime, and then the punishment was to go work in these coal mines. And it was free labor essentially for these, and they were affiliated with U.S. Steel. I mean, these were major coal mining companies that were benefiting from what essentially was slave labor in the 1920s and 1930s. That linked. Again, it's a part of our history that if we don't understand it, if we don't fight for it, we don't understand ourselves. We don't understand who we are. And it's so important to understand who we are. I'm so happy that you had a chance to go to see where your forebears were. So many, I'm sure African Americans can't even do that. Can't make that connection. So
Right.
it's thank you for being able to do that and for pursuing it. So important.
Jesse, you're a great guy. I just would love to have my kids have you as a teacher. And I'd like to give one shout out to a friend of mine, Jonathan Bills, a teacher at Peninsula High School who retired, just posted on Facebook yesterday that he's done. And he's a great teacher, just like you. And when I talk to people who went to Peninsula High School, I always ask the same question: who was your favorite teacher? And Jonathan Bills shows up oftentimes on the top of the list. And I'll bet that you're going to show up on the top of a lot of Garfield students' lists when that same question is asked of them, which is, I can't think of anything more proud than that. So
Get
thank you, my
better and
friend.
get back to work.
Yeah.
Right on, y'all. Thanks
Thank
for
We
you.
having
need
me.
you. We need you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jesse. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks
you,
a lot.
Jesse.